Attendant tells black woman to move back. She's the new director of in-flight operations. Ebony Johnson could feel her heart drumming an anxious rhythm in her chest as she stood at Gate 14 in the bustling Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport. She tugged lightly on the lapel of her crisp blazer and checked her watch for the third time in less than a minute. The truth was, she wasn't just another passenger waiting to board Delta Flight 1864. She was set to make history. But no one around her knew that yet. When she caught sight of a flight attendant eyeing her with an unimpressed glint, Ebony had no inkling that, within mere hours, everything would change. Ebony Johnson had never flown as a regular passenger in such an unassuming way before. Given her new position as the director of in-flight operations, a prestigious and demanding role she had dreamed about for years, she could have arranged a more discreet arrival or used her industry contacts to ease her travel. Yet something told her it would be illuminating to board this particular flight without alerting the entire crew to her identity. She wanted to see the airline through the eyes of an everyday passenger, an African-American woman, traveling alone, with all the vulnerabilities that might entail. It had been 2 decades of working her way up from a fresh-faced flight attendant to a supervisory role, then to corporate training, and finally to the highest operational position in-flight services for Delta Airlines. The journey hadn't been straightforward. Ebony came from a modest background in rural Alabama. Her mother was a schoolteacher, and her father was a long-haul truck driver. She grew up around a sprawling, tight-knit community that believed in the value of hard work, perseverance, and righteous pride. Her parents had taught her that you never turned your back on a challenge, no matter how impossible it might seem, and you always stood up for your dignity. Now, as Ebony prepared to board Flight 1864 to Los Angeles, she was in for a surprise. She wore a simple navy blue pantsuit with minimal jewelry. Her braids were pulled back into a neat ponytail, and she had a black carry-on rolling bag that had seen better days. She was just another traveler in the eyes of most passers-by. Some gave her warm smiles, others barely noticed her. And that was precisely what Ebony wanted on this day. She had made a personal vow she would embark on an unannounced mystery shopper approach to gauge the airline's service, treatment of passengers, cabin cleanliness, and overall flight experience. Only when she landed in Los Angeles would she reveal her identity and head to her first official meeting with the West Coast in-flight team. The flight was slightly delayed, nothing unusual, in one of the busiest airports in the world. Over the loudspeakers, Ebony heard a crackly announcement that boarding would begin in about 20 minutes. She found a seat in the waiting area, sipping from a bottle of water, and let her mind wander back to the day she had accepted the directorial position. The boardroom had been as intimidating as any Ebony had ever entered. A wide, polished table, banks of tall windows, men and women in pressed suits, some of whom she had known for years. Others were new, but all held expressions that were intense and evaluative. When the CEO shook her hand and said, "Congratulations, Ebony. You're officially our new director of in-flight operations," she felt a jolt of disbelief. That disbelief transformed into triumph, then responsibility. She had come so far, but she knew it was only the beginning. The airline wasn't perfect. No airline was, and Ebony carried the aspiration to make it a place where every passenger and every employee felt seen, respected, and genuinely cared for. A tap on her shoulder jolted her out of her reverie. A tall man with a worried expression stood behind her. "Excuse me," he said politely, "is anyone sitting here?" Ebony smiled and gestured to the vacant seat next to her. "Not at all. Have a seat." He breathed a sigh of relief. "Thanks. It's pretty packed here today. I'm Alec, by the way." "Ebony," she introduced herself, reaching out to shake his hand. He appeared tired, perhaps weighed down by heavy concerns. She noticed he kept checking his phone, frowning at the screen as though expecting news. "Heading out for business or pleasure?" Ebony asked. A polite attempt at conversation. Alec shrugged. Business, I guess. A big meeting in LA, but it's a bit overshadowed by some personal stuff. My father's in the hospital. I'm going to see him as soon as I can finalize a few things. Flight's delayed, and it's stressing me out. Ebony offered a sympathetic nod. I'm sorry to hear that. Delays can certainly upend things. She decided not to reveal her own connection to the airline. Already she could sense the tension in his voice and see the anxiousness in his posture. She wondered if there was anything in the airline's operational structure that might help him. She made a mental note: look into passenger support systems during critical life events. People traveling to see family in the hospital or rushing to meet life-altering appointments often needed a different level of empathy and care. Ebony filed away the thought for a future staff training module. When they announced that first class and priority boarding were about to begin, Ebony and Alec parted ways with warm goodbyes. She'd probably see him again on the plane, though. The line began to form quickly, with the typical mix of eager travelers who wanted to find overhead bin space and those who lingered, waiting for their group to be called. Ebony had been assigned a seat toward the front of the economy section. Specifically, she had chosen a seat near the bulkhead to observe how passengers in premium economy and forward economy seats were treated. However, as a courtesy, the administrative assistant who booked her flight had discreetly put a note in the reservation that Ebony was a special courtesy passenger, which often might translate to a seat upgrade if available. She hadn't asked for that, but the assistant insisted, wanting Ebony to be comfortable. Ebony didn't plan on actually moving from her seat. Yet she was aware that at any point, an airline employee might see the note and invite her up front. She decided she would politely decline. She was determined to see the real passenger experience up close. But Ebony never anticipated the level of drama that would unfold that day, triggered by an attendant named Caroline Baker. Caroline Baker had been with Delta for nearly 15 years. She'd started as a bright and eager flight attendant who prided herself on delivering exceptional customer service. Over time, however, the routine had worn her down. Delays, demanding travelers, limited rest, and the occasional rude passenger had all chipped away at Caroline's sunny demeanor. More than that, she had started to lose perspective on how important each individual passenger was. They're just seat numbers, she sometimes joked with her colleagues, not realizing how deeply that mindset had rooted itself. She tended to make snap judgments based on appearances. And on this particular flight, Ebony Johnson became the target of Caroline's frustration. As Ebony approached the doorway of the plane, she nodded politely at the flight attendant stationed by the cockpit. Caroline looked Ebony up and down, her gaze pausing on Ebony's modest carry-on. Ebony sensed the micro-inspection as Caroline tried to decide if Ebony was a threat to overhead bin space or a potential nuisance. "Hello," Ebony said warmly, offering the standard greeting one expects to receive on boarding. Caroline forced a thin smile. "Welcome aboard," she recited mechanically. Then, in a lower tone, she added, "Economy seats are in the back." The statement was accompanied by a glance that Ebony couldn't quite interpret as either annoyance or condescension, or maybe both. Ebony blinked but maintained her composure. "Thanks. I have seat 10D, she said, checking her boarding pass to show she was aware of her assigned position. Caroline gave a curt nod. "Economy comfort is behind first class, but it fills quickly. If you don't have priority, you might want to keep moving," she remarked, as though Ebony was somehow delaying the entire boarding process with her presence. Ebony's brows furrowed slightly. She wasn't used to being spoken to with such a dismissive tone. Still, she offered no argument. She quietly maneuvered down the narrow aisle, scanning seat numbers until she reached row 10. She stowed her carry-on in the overhead bin. Her seat neighbor was an elderly woman with a kind face, already settled in the aisle seat. Ebony offered a polite hello and settled into the window seat. Passengers continued to trickle in, some politely asking their row mates to make room in the overhead compartments, others struggling with multiple bags, and a few carrying children in their arms, trying to calm their fussing toddlers. Ebony recognized the standard hustle and bustle of boarding, something she'd seen 1,000 times in her years as a flight attendant. She noticed Caroline weaving up and down the aisle, occasionally pointing to overhead bins, sighing with impatience, and, at times, rolling her eyes at the confusion of travelers. There was a certain tension in her voice, a certain dryness in her demeanor that hinted at stress or frustration. Ebony tried not to jump to conclusions. Maybe Caroline was having a tough day. After all, Ebony had been there herself. But Ebony also understood that even one flight attendant's offhand remarks or annoyed glares could drastically shape a passenger's experience. And now she was living that experience from the other side. Finally, the plane door was sealed. The captain made an announcement about flight time and weather conditions. Safety videos played. Ebony carefully observed the crew as they performed the safety demonstration. She noted they went through the motions swiftly, with Caroline's expression looking forced, as if everything was an exhausting routine. Once the plane was airborne, Ebony watched the cabin services roll out. The seatbelt sign turned off. People began to shift, stand, retrieve items from overhead bins. The flight attendants prepped carts for beverage service. Caroline and a younger attendant, Trevor, started from the front of the economy cabin, while two others worked their way from the back. They moved in a practiced tango, handing out cups of soda, juices, water, and small snacks. Ebony caught Trevor's eye and offered a polite smile as he handed her a small packet of peanuts and a cup of orange juice. "How's your day going?" Trevor asked brightly, genuine warmth in his tone. "Good, thank you," Ebony replied. "Yours?" "Busy, but can't complain," he said with a nod before moving on to the next row. It was a small courtesy, but Ebony appreciated Trevor's genuine friendliness. Caroline, on the other hand, followed behind him with a stoic expression, retrieving trash and trying to nudge people's items into overhead bins whenever she deemed them out of place. When she got to Ebony's row, she paused and gave Ebony a lingering once-over, almost as if Ebony had done something wrong. "Is your bag stowed properly?" Caroline asked, but her tone was accusatory, not polite. "You only brought one carry-on, right?" "That's the rule. I have just one," Ebony answered, her voice unwavering. "It's overhead." Caroline's gaze flicked up, verifying Ebony's statement. Then she moved on without a word. The flight continued without much fanfare for the next hour or so. Ebony tried to settle into a good book, but she found herself reading the same paragraph multiple times. She was too attuned to the mood in the cabin, the uneasy feeling she was getting from Caroline's presence. Meanwhile, the older woman in the aisle seat introduced herself as Mildred and struck up a conversation about her granddaughter's college graduation. Ebony found Mildred's warmth refreshing. She asked Ebony if this was her first time traveling to Los Angeles, and Ebony chuckled softly, explaining she used to live part-time in LA for work. Mildred didn't pry further, and Ebony was grateful for that. Caroline's next conflict came about an hour and a half into the flight, when a young black man in row 12 found himself in an awkward predicament. He had dozed off, and his leg inadvertently stretched out into the aisle. Caroline, pushing the beverage cart back to the galley, nearly tripped. She let out an exasperated exclamation that turned several passengers' heads. "You have to keep your feet out of the aisle." Caroline barked at the drowsy passenger. Startled, the young man sat up, blinking rapidly. "I'm sorry," he said, adjusting his posture immediately. "I didn't realize that's how people get hurt," Caroline interrupted, barely letting him speak. She shot him a glare. If you can't keep your feet in your space, you should have booked an extra legroom seat or first class. Ebony's eyes widened at the harshness of Caroline's words. Passengers around row 12 exchanged awkward glances. Some looked appalled, others said nothing, burying their faces in newspapers or turning up the volume on their headphones, unwilling to get involved. The young man, clearly embarrassed, murmured another apology and sank low in his seat. Caroline moved on, muttering something under her breath that Ebony couldn't quite catch. But Ebony noticed the tension in the cabin had risen a notch. The flight wasn't full, but it wasn't exactly calm either. Ebony thought of intervening, but she wanted to observe a bit longer. The best way to see how an employee truly behaved was not to reveal her rank too soon. Eventually, Ebony could no longer stay silent. Near the midpoint of the flight, Ebony got up to stretch her legs and headed toward the galley to ask for some water. She found Caroline alone near the beverage station, scribbling notes on a small notepad. Ebony stood politely, waiting for Caroline to acknowledge her. "Yes?" Caroline said, barely looking up. "Excuse me," Ebony said. "Could I get a cup of water, please?" Caroline didn't move immediately. Instead, she finished whatever she was writing, then set down her pen. She filled a plastic cup from a water pitcher, handed it to Ebony, and said in a low voice, "We generally distribute water once every hour or so. If you're thirsty, there should be enough in your cup from earlier." Ebony resisted the urge to frown. She took the cup gently. "It's no trouble, just needed some hydration. Thank you." Caroline shrugged, her face impassive. "All right, anything else?" Ebony considered her next words carefully. "I noticed you seemed upset earlier when a passenger's foot was in the aisle. I understand safety is a priority, but..." Caroline's expression darkened. "It's my job to keep the cabin safe. When people don't follow the rules, I have to enforce them. Sometimes that means being firm." "Of course, I was just concerned the passenger may have felt singled out," Ebony said gently. "I used to be a flight attendant, so I understand the challenges." Caroline's eyes narrowed slightly. "Look, I don't know what your background is, but we have procedures. Delta is known for great service, sure, but that doesn't mean letting people trample over safety guidelines." "I won't apologize for doing my job." Ebony nodded, maintaining a calm tone. "I respect that." Without another word, Caroline turned her back to Ebony, resuming her tasks with the beverage cart. Ebony felt a flush of anger welling up in her chest, but she also felt pity. Something was clearly eroding Caroline's empathy. Ebony made a mental note to request a review of Caroline's flight performance once she revealed her identity. For Ebony, it wasn't merely about punishing Caroline. It was about understanding how flight attendants like Caroline were being supported, or perhaps neglected, by the airline's training, scheduling, and leadership. People didn't just wake up one day and become bitter or rude. Often it was the accumulation of stress, exhaustion, poor management, or personal struggles. Still, Ebony also knew accountability mattered. Passengers deserved better. She returned to her seat, took a few sips of water, and tried to decompress. Mildred gave her a sympathetic glance, as if to say, "I saw that." Ebony just smiled softly and took a deep breath. She was determined to remain in passenger mode a bit longer. Just as Ebony settled back, an overhead announcement crackled through the speakers. "If there is a medical professional on board, please press your call light. We have a passenger in need of assistance at this time." The voice was that of Trevor, the younger flight attendant. All eyes turned to find the commotion. Several rows behind Ebony, a woman appeared to be faint or dizzy. Passengers around her were craning their necks and speaking in urgent tones. Ebony's instincts kicked in. She'd been trained extensively for in-flight medical emergencies in her earlier years. In fact, flight attendants were often the first line of defense, but Ebony had far more advanced training than many, given her subsequent roles. She weighed whether she should identify herself as an experienced flight attendant, but before she could decide, an older gentleman in a sports jacket stood up, announcing he was a doctor. Trevor rushed down the aisle with the emergency medical kit. Ebony watched as Trevor and the doctor tried to assist the woman who had apparently fainted. Caroline arrived about a minute later, and Ebony noticed that she seemed flustered, struggling to maintain a calm presence. She barked orders to other passengers to clear the aisle, but didn't address the patient directly. Instead, she rummaged through the medical kit, not handing the correct items to the doctor at first. Trevor had to correct her, gently guiding her to find the right equipment. The woman, in her mid-30s, regained consciousness slowly. She explained in a weak voice that she hadn't eaten much before the flight. Due to rushing, she felt dizzy and nauseous, likely from low blood sugar and anxiety. The doctor recommended giving her something with sugar, such as juice or soda. Trevor scrambled to bring a can of ginger ale and some snacks. Caroline, still visibly rattled, tried to reassert control, telling onlookers, "Move along, folks, we have it under control." But her tone was sharp, less concerned with comforting the ill passenger and more about reigning in the perceived chaos. After about 10 minutes, the patient seemed stable. The doctor and Trevor helped her recline her seat, placed a cold compress on her forehead, and reassured her. Ebony could see Trevor's empathetic approach. He knelt beside her, spoke in a soothing tone, and stayed with the passenger until she showed genuine signs of improvement. In contrast, Caroline hovered, arms folded, eyebrows pinched. Once the immediate scare subsided, she left Trevor to deal with the passenger while she returned to the front galley. The incident settled, but Ebony's concern deepened. Flight attendants were trained to respond compassionately to medical events, not just manage them clinically. Caroline's demeanor was bordering on unprofessional. Ebony wondered if Caroline felt overshadowed by Trevor's competence or if she was simply burned out. Either way, Ebony made another mental note. As the flight continued, Ebony had fleeting thoughts about how this entire scenario might play out once she landed. She wanted to address the issues she was seeing on this flight in a constructive manner. Perhaps she could highlight Trevor's excellent performance in a commendation and raise concerns about Caroline's behavior. But Ebony still had no idea that the biggest confrontation was yet to come. About 3 hours into the flight, the cabin lights had dimmed slightly. Passengers were either watching movies on seatback screens, reading, or trying to nap. Ebony was about to close her eyes when she heard rustling in the aisle near her row. She lifted her gaze to see Caroline standing beside her, arms crossed. Ebony tensed, unsure what prompted Caroline's presence this time. "Ma'am," Caroline said in a low, curt voice. "I need you to move to another seat." Ebony blinked, confusion evident on her face. "Excuse me?" Caroline gestured dismissively. "We have a passenger who's a Sky Miles Elite member needing extra legroom." He was seated farther back. "One of the seats in the row behind the emergency exit is free, so you'll move there." Ebony felt her jaw tighten, the nerve to not request politely, but to demand. She glanced around, noticing the older woman, Mildred, was looking on in concern. "Wait, I'm not sure I understand," Ebony said politely. "I have an assigned seat right here in 10D. Caroline's eyebrows arched. "Yes, but you're not a priority passenger, correct? The gentleman in question is a Diamond Medallion member. We try to accommodate them in more comfortable seats whenever possible." She paused, staring pointedly at Ebony. "You'll have to move back." Ebony inhaled slowly, trying to keep her composure. "I was assigned this seat when I booked. I don't recall any policy stating that a confirmed seat can be taken away from a passenger mid-flight for an upgrade." Caroline's lips thinned. "It's within our discretion to reseat passengers for operational reasons. I need you to cooperate." Though Ebony was well aware of airline policy, she decided to remain in the role of an ordinary passenger. She also realized that Ironically, she might have been considered a VIP as well, but Caroline either hadn't checked or had chosen to ignore it. Ebony tried to reason with her politely. I understand that sometimes seat changes are necessary. However, typically if someone wants a better seat, they have to arrange that prior to takeoff or at the gate. This is highly unusual. Caroline's expression remained stoic. Are you refusing to comply with a crew member's instruction? Ebony's pulse quickened. She knew how easily an attendant could manipulate the phrase, refusing to comply to escalate a situation. In extreme cases, such language could lead to a passenger being flagged as disruptive. Ebony, of course, had every right to remain in her assigned seat, but she also knew Caroline was pushing an authoritative boundary. Meanwhile, passengers in nearby rows began watching the confrontation, their eyes filled with confusion and intrigue. Mildred leaned over, adding quietly, "She's been seated here the whole flight." "I don't see why she should have to move." Caroline shot Mildred a stern look. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am." Ebony placed a gentle hand on Mildred's arm, signaling gratitude for her support. Then she turned back to Caroline, the first not trying to cause a scene. "I respect that you need to accommodate a frequent flyer. Perhaps there's another seat for him, or if the flight has open seats, maybe you can work something out. But I am not comfortable with giving up my seat under these circumstances, especially if it is simply to upgrade someone else." Caroline pursed her lips. She leaned down, her voice dropping to a near whisper that dripped with condescension. "This passenger deserves more respect than you, obviously. Move to the back." A hush fell around them. Ebony felt the hairs on her arms stand up. The conversation had now taken a blatantly personal turn. She didn't know if the subtext was racial, classist, or a combination of both, but it was there, glaringly. She kept her voice steady. "I'll ask you one more time to explain the operational need for me to move. If it's an actual safety or operational concern, I'll comply. But upgrading someone at the expense of another passenger is not standard operational practice." Caroline's eyes flickered with annoyance. She seemed torn, as though she wanted to continue forcing Ebony's hand, but was also aware she was walking a tight line. Nearby passengers openly stared, some frowning at Caroline, others whispering among themselves. Just when the tension seemed about to boil over, Trevor arrived, looking uncertain. "What's going on?" Trevor asked, glancing from Caroline to Ebony. Caroline let out an exasperated sigh. "We have a diamond medallion who wants a seat up front." "I'm trying to reseat this passenger so we can accommodate him." Trevor's face showed confusion, then concern. "But 10D is a confirmed seat for her, right?" He made a quick gesture toward Ebony. "We don't usually do mid-flight seat changes for preference alone. Is there an actual problem with his seat?" Caroline responded with a dismissive wave. "He's tall. He's uncomfortable. That's enough of a problem in my book." Trevor bit his lip, looking from Caroline to Ebony, then to the cluster of passengers who were now very much tuned in. "We normally try to handle these requests before takeoff," he said diplomatically. "And if someone is truly that tall, we consider exit row seats if they're safe and available. But forcibly moving a paying passenger is a last resort, and the flight is nearly halfway over." Ebony appreciated Trevor's attempt at reason. Caroline, however, clearly did not. Her eyes flashed with anger. She leveled a furious stare at Ebony, then said with forced calm, "I suppose we'll have to leave things as they are for now, then." Trevor nodded with relief. "Yes. That's probably best. We can see if there's a seat in the exit row that's free, or if he wants to switch with someone else who volunteers." He turned to Ebony. "Thank you for your patience, ma'am." Ebony merely inclined her head, her heart still pounding with the adrenaline of the confrontation. As Caroline stomped away, Ebony released a quiet breath. Around her, passengers murmured in hushed tones, some giving her sympathetic nods or encouraging smiles. Mildred patted Ebony's arm lightly. "You handled that well, dear." "If that happened to me, I would have been shaking like a leaf." Ebony smiled softly, grateful for the support. "Thank you, Mildred. It's not the first time I've had to deal with something like that." Inside, though, Ebony was roiling with emotions. Anger, hurt, and disappointment mingled. It was one thing to witness a flight attendant being curt or tired. It was another to be subjected to blatant disrespect. And Ebony's identity as a black woman added another layer. She had grown accustomed to subtle, sometimes not so subtle, dismissals and assumptions. But Ebony also understood she held a new position of power, one that could address this issue on a systemic level. She felt the weight of that responsibility pressing on her. The remainder of the flight was tense, but without further incident. Caroline seemed to avoid Ebony's row. Ebony noticed she focused her attention elsewhere, fussing over small details or engaging in conversation with other passengers in a more congenial tone. Perhaps she felt she had lost face and wanted to salvage her own pride. Meanwhile, Ebony busied herself with the in-flight entertainment, though she couldn't concentrate on the movie she'd chosen. Instead, she kept turning over the events in her mind, replaying the confrontation, analyzing Caroline's behavior, and planning how to address it once she revealed her role. Finally, after the plane began its descent into Los Angeles International Airport, Ebony felt her nerves tighten again. The seatbelt sign illuminated. Passengers stowed their belongings. Caroline made the customary announcements in a clipped, robotic voice. Ebony found her gaze drifting to the flight attendant repeatedly, her thoughts swirling with everything she would need to do once on the ground. When the plane touched down, Ebony felt a surge of relief. The final taxi to the gate seemed interminable, but eventually the aircraft parked and the seatbelt sign clicked off. Passengers sprang to their feet, grabbing suitcases and duffel bags from overhead bins. Ebony took her time, waiting for the bustle to subside. Mildred said a warm goodbye, wishing Ebony safe travels, and Ebony thanked her kindly. Alec, the man she'd met in the waiting area, also passed by, offering a small wave. Ebony smiled, but stayed in her seat, rummaging through her carry-on as though looking for something. In truth, she was waiting for the plane to clear so she could speak privately with the cabin crew. After most passengers had disembarked, Ebony stood, retrieving her bag. She walked to the front of the plane, where Caroline and Trevor were standing by the cockpit door, performing a final check of the cabin. Caroline avoided eye contact, but Trevor offered a genuine smile. "Thank you for flying with us," Trevor said, his tone kind. "Hope you have a great time in L.A." Ebony's heart pounded. She was about to shed her anonymity. Glancing at Caroline, she saw that the woman was busy sorting through some papers, though Ebony suspected she was deliberately ignoring her. "Thank you, Trevor," Ebony responded calmly. "I wonder if the two of you might spare a moment. I need to speak with you regarding this flight." Caroline finally looked up, eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Regarding what? Is there an issue with your baggage or something?" Ebony gave a measured smile. "Not exactly. Let me introduce myself properly." She reached into her bag and pulled out her official Delta ID badge. "My name is Ebony Johnson. I'm the new director of in-flight operations for Delta Airlines. I was on this flight incognito as a standard passenger to observe our service protocols. For a moment, it felt as though the entire plane held its breath. Trevor's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and sudden realization. Caroline's face went pale, then flushed a deep crimson. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Ebony took a gentle breath, projecting the calm authority she had earned over 2 decades in the industry. "I want to commend you, Trevor, for your professionalism and genuine concern for the passengers today, especially how you handled the medical incident. You exemplified exactly what we want from our cabin crew: empathy, competence, and grace under pressure." Trevor exhaled a shaky breath. "Thank you, Miss Johnson," he managed, clearly stunned. Then Ebony turned to Caroline, keeping her voice level, though firm. "Caroline, I'm going to need you to accompany me to the Delta offices once we disembark." I have some concerns about this flight, specifically your interactions with multiple passengers, including me. We need to have a serious conversation. Caroline opened her mouth, but no words came out. Finally, she stuttered, I didn't realize. Ebony offered a nod. I realize that. That's part of the problem. With that, Ebony walked down the jet bridge. She could feel her pulse thudding, the mixture of vindication and sadness swirling within her. She took no joy in exposing Caroline's behavior, but accountability was paramount. This flight was supposed to be a routine check of day-to-day operations, but it had revealed deeper issues. Ebony recalled her father's words about dignity. It's something you carry with you, Ebony, and you never let anyone take it away. Within half an hour, Ebony was inside Delta's LAX regional offices, situated not far from the airport's terminals. A small reception area led to a maze of conference rooms and offices. Despite the hustle and bustle, Ebony's arrival caused quite a stir. Word spread quickly that the new director of in-flight operations was on the premises, unannounced, with a flight attendant in tow who looked noticeably tense. The West Coast in-flight operations manager, a middle-aged man named Carlos Perez, greeted Ebony with a warm handshake and an expression of curiosity. Miss Johnson, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow's briefing. Ebony nodded. I know, but there's been a situation on Flight 1864. I'd like to address it immediately. I also have some urgent commendations and concerns. Carlos nodded, his eyes flicking to Caroline, who stood behind Ebony, shoulders hunched, face drawn. Of course, let's step into my office. The three of them, Ebony, Carlos and Caroline, settled into a modest conference room. A rectangular table took up most of the space, and a few pictures of planes and flight routes decorated the walls. Ebony could sense Caroline's nervous energy radiating across the table. Carlos, for his part, wore a neutral, patient expression, ready to hear Ebony's account. Ebony began by detailing her position and the purpose of her incognito flight. She explained that she had chosen not to use her directorial status to influence any part of the journey. She walked Carlos through the various incidents. Caroline's cold demeanor during boarding, her harsh words to the passenger whose foot was in the aisle, and her dismissive attitude during the medical event. Finally, she recounted the confrontation where Caroline demanded Ebony move seats mid-flight for a diamond medallion passenger. Carlos listened intently, occasionally taking notes, glancing at Caroline, who remained silent, eyes lowered. When Ebony finished her summary, she added softly, I know flight attendants have stressful jobs. I understand it's not easy, but it's critical to maintain compassion, professionalism, and fairness to every passenger, regardless of status or background. That clearly didn't happen today. Carlos set his pen down, folded his hands on the table, and turned to Caroline. Is there anything you want to add, Caroline? Caroline lifted her gaze, tears brimming in her eyes. She opened her mouth and closed it again before saying in a trembling voice, I'm sorry. It's been a difficult few months. I know that's not an excuse. My mother passed away recently, and I've been dealing with estate issues. I guess I've let my personal frustrations spill into my work. I shouldn't have taken it out on the passengers, let alone Miss Johnson. Her words hung in the air, thick with regret. Ebony felt a tug of sympathy. She understood grief and how it could cloud someone's demeanor, but Ebony also knew boundaries had been crossed. Caroline continued, I was out of line, especially with you, Miss Johnson. The first made assumptions, and I treated you unfairly. I need a break from work, maybe, but I'm scared to lose my job. I've been a flight attendant for 15 years. I love flying. I'm so sorry. Tears slid down Caroline's cheeks. Ebony glanced at Carlos, who looked equally solemn. Ebony inhaled slowly. I appreciate your honesty, Caroline. The first truly do. I'm deeply sorry for your loss. However, your behavior on the flight was unacceptable. We're responsible for the well-being and dignity of everyone on board. What if the passenger you snapped at was traveling under stressful circumstances? Or the passenger you tried to move had a disability or some reason they needed that seat? We must be consistent in applying policy and empathy. Caroline nodded, sniffling. I know. You're right. Carlos looked at Ebony. How would you like to proceed, Miss Johnson? Ebony paused, collecting her thoughts. I don't believe in firing someone outright without exploring corrective steps, especially if personal hardship is a contributing factor. We should hold a performance review, possibly reassign Caroline to a non-flight role temporarily if needed. She should undergo retraining, including advanced customer service and conflict resolution modules. Also, I'd recommend a conversation with HR about mental health support or counseling, given the grief she's dealing with. Caroline's shoulders sagged in relief. Thank you, she whispered. I promise I'll do everything I can to fix this. Ebony offered a small nod. We all have bad days, Caroline. But we must remember that as flight attendants, passengers trust us to keep them safe and treat them with respect. We can't let personal frustrations overshadow that responsibility. Carlos agreed to the plan, promising to facilitate immediate steps for Caroline's retraining and offer resources for her emotional well-being. With a few final notes, the meeting concluded. Caroline was escorted from the conference room to start the mandatory process. Ebony and Carlos lingered behind to discuss a few additional matters. I also want to mention Trevor, Ebony said, her eyes lighting up with genuine admiration. He excelled in every scenario. I'll be putting in a commendation for him, maybe a promotion track. He's exactly the kind of flight attendant we need to celebrate. Carlos nodded eagerly. That's great to hear. Trevor is relatively new, but he's been consistently praised by passengers. I'll make sure he gets the recognition he deserves. Ebony smiled. Thank you. I'm going to freshen up, then prepare for tomorrow's scheduled meeting. Let's keep this flight's details internal for now, but I want immediate actions taken for improvement. Understood, Miss Johnson, Carlos replied with respect. Ebony left the conference room feeling a swirl of emotions. She didn't revel in punishing Caroline, but she felt a sense of justice that the problem was being addressed. If Ebony's presence and position could drive positive change, then the humiliations she'd endured on that flight were not in vain. Walking through the corridor, Ebony spotted a reflection of herself in a glass panel. For a moment she paused. A tall, poised black woman stared back at her, carrying a leather folder. She was no longer that timid flight attendant from 2 decades ago. She had earned her position, faced discrimination, overcame doubters, and now stood ready to shape the airline's culture. A rush of pride, mixed with responsibility, flooded her. The next chapter of her career was underway, and Ebony was determined to make every flight a more welcoming and respectful experience for passengers and crew alike. Later that day, Ebony checked into her hotel near Los Angeles International Airport. She was slated for a meeting the following morning, but her mind buzzed with everything that had happened. She decided to have a quiet dinner in her room, ordering room service. As she ate a salad and sipped a calming tea, she reflected on how quickly life could shift. Mere hours ago, she was just another passenger in seat 10D, being told to move to the back. Now she was forging policy decisions that might ripple through the entire in-flight service department. The next morning, Ebony rose early, feeling refreshed. She put on a tailored charcoal grey suit, pinned her official badge to her lapel, and took a quick call from the corporate headquarters in Atlanta. Her staff wanted an update on how her unannounced visit had gone. Ebony gave them a diplomatic summary, emphasizing the areas of improvement she witnessed and highlighting the shining examples set by Trevor. She also made a mental note to speak to the corporate training department about implementing more robust empathy training. By 9 o'clock, Ebony was seated in a sleek conference room at Delta's LAX office. Several West Coast managers filed in, including Carlos, who nodded respectfully. Another manager, Lisa Chang, a woman with short, stylish hair and an enthusiastic grin, sat beside Carlos. The meeting was mostly about schedules, staffing, new route expansions, and operational efficiency. Ebony contributed her observations, praising the staff where it was due and flagging concerns. But she withheld the details of her personal experience from the entire group, keeping the matter mostly between her, Carlos, and HR. Ebony believed in handling sensitive personnel issues privately, not making a public spectacle. Halfway through the meeting, Ebony's phone buzzed. She glanced down and saw a text from Carlos. "Caroline would like to speak to you privately. She's in my office now." Ebony replied that she'd be there once the meeting concluded. She wondered what Caroline needed to say that she hadn't already expressed. An hour later, the meeting broke for lunch. Ebony excused herself and made her way to Carlos's office. Inside, she found Caroline seated on a small couch, hands folded in her lap. The puffiness around her eyes suggested she had been crying again. She stood when Ebony entered. "Miss Johnson," Caroline said in a tentative voice, "thank you for meeting with me." Ebony closed the door gently. "Of course, please sit." Caroline sat, and Ebony took the armchair across from her. Carlos lingered near his desk, giving them enough space to talk, but ready to mediate if needed. Caroline began, I know I apologized yesterday, but I wanted to say it again. And to let you know that I'm going to take a short leave of absence. HR is helping arrange it. I realized I need help dealing with my grief before I can continue to serve passengers effectively." Ebony felt genuine empathy. "That's a wise decision. I respect you for recognizing it. Flight attendants carry a lot of emotional labor on top of the physical demands." Caroline nodded, eyes watery. "I used to love this job, connecting with people, being part of their journeys. But after my mother's death, something in me just hardened. Everything felt like a burden, and I started resenting the passengers for needing me. It's not right, and I see that now. I just want to come back better if the company will still have me." Ebony offered a kind smile. "We're not in the business of discarding good people during tough times. As I mentioned, I want you to receive the resources you need, and when you're ready, we'll revisit your position. Retraining will be part of it, but I believe in second chances." Caroline's shoulders shook as she let out a relieved sob. She quickly wiped her face. Thank you so much." In that moment, Ebony felt the weight of her authority. She had the power to either ruin a career or help salvage it. She chose the path of empathy, guided by the belief that corporate leadership should reflect humanity. Still, Ebony was firm about one aspect. "Caroline, I do need you to understand that if you come back, the standards are extremely high. The safety and dignity of our passengers can't be compromised." Caroline met Ebony's gaze, determination shining through her tears. "I understand." They concluded their conversation, and Caroline left to finalize her leave of absence details. Ebony lingered in the office, checking her watch. She still had to finalize her official introduction to the West Coast staff. In about 15 minutes, a short meet and greet. She inhaled deeply, steeling herself for the next step in her busy day. The meet and greet took place in a spacious lounge where Delta employees, flight attendants, ground staff, and administrative workers had gathered to welcome the new director of in-flight operations. Ebony stepped to the front, an air of confidence around her that was hard-earned. She scanned the room, seeing curious faces, warm smiles, and the typical mix of excitement and apprehension that greets any new executive. Carlos introduced her formally, highlighting her extensive background and her dedication to passenger experience. Ebony nodded in acknowledgement and then addressed the group in a clear, steady voice. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ebony Johnson, and I'm honored to be your new director of in-flight operations. Many of you have heard about my journey from flight attendant to various management roles. That journey taught me that service is not just a job, it's a calling. Every single person who boards our aircraft entrusts us with their safety, comfort, and dignity. It is our duty to rise to that trust. She paused, letting her words resonate. I'm here to listen, to learn, and to make changes where needed. My vision is simple. Every passenger, from the most loyal diamond medallion to the first-time traveler, should feel respected and cared for on our planes. We'll refine our training, enhance our communication, and work to improve your work-life balance, because you can't pour from an empty cup. A soft ripple of applause spread through the room. Ebony continued, I look forward to meeting each of you, hearing your ideas, and together building upon Delta's reputation for excellence. Thank you. Another round of applause, louder this time. Ebony stepped away from the podium, and a line of employees formed, eager to shake her hand or share a quick thought. She gave them all her full attention, grateful for their insights. Some had suggestions about meal service improvements or more ergonomic cabin tools. Others simply wanted to welcome her. Among the crowd, Ebony noticed Trevor. He lingered off to the side, as if not wanting to intrude. Ebony excused herself from one conversation and waved him over. Trevor, I'm so glad you came, Ebony said brightly. He smiled, still looking somewhat starstruck. I didn't expect to see you again so soon, Miss Johnson. Ebony gestured for him to move into a quieter corner of the lounge. Please, call me Ebony. I wanted to personally thank you for how you handled yesterday's flight. You demonstrated genuine kindness, competence, and courage. Trevor beamed. That means a lot. I always try to remember how I felt on my very first flight as a passenger. I was nervous, excited, and hoping the crew would guide me gently. I want to provide that same reassurance to others. Ebony nodded, touched by his sincerity. Keep that attitude, Trevor. It'll serve you and the passengers well. I've already recommended you for a commendation. Carlos and I also discussed potentially enrolling you in an advanced leadership program. Trevor's eyes widened. Me? Leadership program? Yes, Ebony confirmed. It would be a series of trainings designed to develop future leads and supervisors within the airline. You've shown a natural aptitude for teamwork and leadership, and I think you'd excel if given the chance. Trevor's voice shook with excitement. I'd be honored. Thank you so much. I won't let you down. Ebony laughed gently. I'm sure you won't. Now, enjoy the rest of the meet and greet, and let's keep in touch. Trevor moved off, practically glowing. Ebony felt a swell of hope that there were employees like Trevor within the ranks, people who could embody the airline's best values and inspire others. For the next hour, Ebony spoke to dozens of Delta staff members, each conversation reinforcing her commitment to the job. By the end, she felt both energized and a bit overwhelmed. The day had been an emotional roller coaster, from confronting Caroline's behavior to offering her a path to redemption, from meeting the staff to planning new initiatives. But Ebony thrived on challenges, and she was ready for more. Just when Ebony felt she was making real progress, an unsettling reminder emerged that not everyone welcomed her changes. It started with a cryptic text message, "Watch your back," #legacy crew sent from an unknown number. At first, Ebony brushed it off as a fluke. Yet days later, she arrived at her office to find hateful graffiti scrawled on her door, "Stay in your lane." Security footage soon revealed a hooded figure sneaking through the corridor at night. After cross-referencing ID swipes, the culprit was discovered. An ex-flight attendant, fired long before Ebony's arrival, who harbored resentment against the company's new direction. The vandals' misguided attempt to rattle Ebony backfired, rallying the airline's leadership and staff to her side. Rather than intimidate her, this incident only solidified Ebony's resolve. She refused to be derailed by fear or bitterness. With the backing of executives and loyal employees, she stayed focused on her mission to ensure every flight carried the promise of dignity, unity, and excellence. A month later, Ebony was back in Los Angeles for another regional check-in. She stepped onto the concourse, her carry-on rolling smoothly behind her, feeling a sense of déjà vu from that fateful day on Flight 1864. But this time, she arrived with a comfortable sense of belonging. Staff members recognized her from a distance, waving or offering polite greetings. Carlos greeted her in the administrative office. "Welcome back, Miss Johnson." Ebony smiled. "Good to see you, Carlos. Any updates on Caroline?" Carlos nodded, leading her down a hallway. She's completed grief counseling, and HR reports she's making good progress in the emotional wellness program. She's also done a refresher course in our advanced customer service modules. She requested to meet you today if you're available. Ebony's heart lightened. Certainly, they found Caroline in a smaller conference room, dressed in a simple blouse and slacks. She appeared calmer, though a bit nervous. When Ebony entered, Caroline rose to her feet, offering a respectful nod. Carlos lingered by the door, then quietly stepped out to let them talk privately. "Hi, Caroline," Ebony greeted. Setting her folder on the table, Caroline offered a small smile. "Hello, Miss Johnson. Thank you for agreeing to see me." Ebony gestured for her to sit. "I'm glad to, and you can call me Ebony." Caroline seemed to gather herself. "Ebony, I wanted to share my gratitude. The counseling and retraining opened my eyes to how I was letting my personal pain shape my work. I had no right to speak to you or any passenger the way I did. I'm deeply ashamed, but I'm also committed to doing better." Ebony clasped her hands, nodding in approval. "I appreciate your honesty. How do you feel about returning to flight duties?" Caroline took a measured breath. "I'm ready, or at least I think I am. I've been practicing new coping strategies for stress. I've also reflected on how I can rediscover that joy I used to feel when I first started flying." Ebony assessed Caroline carefully. She believed in second chances, but she also believed in accountability. "All right, based on the reports from HR and your instructors, it sounds like you've taken this seriously. We can arrange for you to rejoin flight duty on a probationary basis. You'll have regular check-ins with a supervisor, and you'll undergo additional evaluations for a few months." Caroline nodded, her voice faint with relief. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Ebony smiled. "I hope not. Remember, your role is vital not just for safety, but for creating positive experiences for everyone on board. If I can help in any way, let me know." Caroline stood, and to Ebony's surprise, she reached out her hand. Ebony accepted it, and they shared a firm handshake. In that moment, Ebony felt the intangible weight of letting go of past animosity. Caroline was not the same bitter attendant who had barked at Ebony to move to the back. Life had taught Ebony that growth was always possible if someone truly wanted it. Soon after, Ebony prepared to board another routine flight from LA back to Atlanta, this time not incognito. She had work waiting for her at headquarters and a new wave of operational changes to oversee. As she made her way to the boarding gate, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was Mildred, the elderly woman who had sat next to Ebony on that eventful flight weeks ago. Ebony hesitated a second before approaching. She tapped Mildred lightly on the shoulder. Mildred, the older woman, turned, momentarily confused. Then her face lit up with recognition. "Oh my goodness. Ebony, is that you?" Ebony laughed. "Yes, ma'am. I see you're traveling again." Mildred nodded, eyes sparkling. "I am. Off to see my granddaughter again. She's got a new internship, and I couldn't wait to hear all about it in person." She glanced at Ebony's professional attire, the Delta badge shining on her lapel. "Looks like you're up in the world, dear." Ebony smiled gently. "I am, actually. I'm now the director of in-flight operations for Delta." Mildred gasped in delight. "I had no idea. That means you were on that flight, and my goodness." Well, that attendant had no clue who she was dealing with. Ebony grinned. "It turned out all right. There was a lesson in it for all of us." Mildred patted Ebony's arm affectionately. "I love to see you shining. You take care now." They parted ways, Ebony feeling an unexpected warmth from the chance encounter. That single moment encapsulated the entire journey. Once Ebony was just a passenger in seat 10D, receiving questionable treatment and forced to hold her tongue. Now, she was a recognized leader, shaping the airline's policies to ensure no one else would endure the same indignities. The arc felt complete, yet Ebony knew her work was far from finished. Every flight was a new opportunity to champion fairness and empathy. Every day brought new challenges: a disgruntled passenger, a flight attendant on the brink of burnout, a delayed flight that tested everyone's patience. But Ebony welcomed it all, guided by her unwavering commitment to dignity and respect. Thank you for joining me on this dramatic, twist-filled journey of Ebony Johnson, a woman who rose from humble beginnings to become Delta's new director of in-flight operations, only to face discrimination and ultimately transform that adversity into meaningful change. From the tense standoff in seat 10D to the heartfelt confrontations behind corporate doors, Ebony's story shows us how integrity, empathy, and determination can transcend even the harshest challenges. And let's not forget the sweet taste of karma when her very public test of patience led to an even stronger network of support. If this story moved you, inspired you, or left you hungry for more tales of resilience, do me a favor. Please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that growth is always possible, and subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories. Together, let's keep spreading hope, one story at a time.